We want to shift our focus now to criminal justice reform. In the mid-1980s, Washington, D.C. was called the murder capital of the U.S. Killings were chalked up at that time to crack cocaine, and the kingpin was a man named Raphael Edmonds, and his right-hand man was Tony Lewis. Now, both men were overseeing a $2 million a week crack cocaine empire. In 1989, both of them had the book thrown at them, and now Tony Lewis Jr. is on a mission to get his father freed from prison. He's going to be holding a rally tomorrow at DC's Black Lives Matter Plaza. And Tony joins us again. And Tony, I'm glad that you're back with us, because for those who aren't familiar with your father's case, he was considered to be the #2 guy. So I know you want people to come out and support him, but why should they?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, my father, first of all, somebody is incredibly accountable and remorseful for the decisions that he made. Growing up on Hanover Place, poverty-stricken community, it's not an excuse, but got involved into a criminal lifestyle early in his life and as a boy, and just grew into that. And at 26, he went to prison to pay his debt to society, but he got the sentence of life without the possibility of parole. So this is not about my dad being innocent, but it's about the fact that he was overly sentenced. Not just him, but tens of thousands of Black and brown Americans across the country due to draconian federal sentencing. And so we feel like now his debt has been paid. He's done so much with me in terms of restorative and redemptive acts. He's done so much on his own in terms of mentoring younger inmates. He's been a model inmate. He's had only 2 minor disciplinary infractions since being incarcerated. And you're talking about over 3 decades, which is pretty unheard of. He's been somebody that the administration at his facility turns to bring peace and resolve on the compound. And he's worked again with me to help support returning citizens, children of incarcerated parents, and also to promote public safety in general. He's not proud of the decisions he's made, but he is proud of what he's done over the last 32 years. And he's approaching 59. He's a grandfather. And we feel like now is the time. Is National Second Chance Month. I feel like my father's the poster child for somebody deserving of a second chance. And he really can be an asset now to the community if he's returned.
And Tony, I was working the streets when your dad was out there, and I know the entire story. But I'm curious
Sure.
now from your standpoint, because that 30 years went by fast if you're outside of prison, but your father was inside of prison and you were waiting on your father on the outside. What was it like growing up without a father, and how do you want that really to factor into what we call criminal justice reform? Because it's easy for people like me to say, well, he deserved it. But it's a lot harder to understand the true dynamic of what happens when people give these large, and I mean large, sentences to people like your father.
Yeah, I think mass incarceration has been the greatest destabilizer to families like mine. My world got turned upside down. My mom started to deal with severe mental illness, so I lost her in a way also. Children with incarcerated parents, which is probably about 2.7 million. Children that's under 18 in this country, probably 10 million people that has had an incarcerated parent. It presents so many other adverse childhood experiences, right? So many traumas. But my dad, consistently, he's the reason I'm here. He never encouraged me to go his route. He always was transparent about his decisions and the penalty that he was suffering, how bad prison was, and that would be the last place that I would ever want to be. He pushed me to go in the direction that I am. So everything that the community sort of, salutes me for, he's owed a piece of that, because he's part of the reason that I'm here. And I want people to understand that, these mandatory minimum sentencing that took people's lives away. Like, and in my work, Dale, I work in reentry. I'm a reentry leader here in D.C. And I've sat across from people that molested children, committed homicides, raped women, whatever the case. And I'm not saying this to judge them. My role is to help them not do that again. But my point is, how is it that selling drugs kind of put people at the apex of criminality? Like, to give somebody life without the possibility of parole, I feel like is egregious for somebody that wasn't convicted of taking a life. And not to mention, right, that our President Joe Biden was so instrumental in the system we have in mass incarceration. He ran on righting those wrongs. He ran on even abolishing the death penalty. So if people get off death row, they're going to have life without the possibility of parole. So how can my father...
Hey, Tony, before...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I want to ask you a question. Yeah, there are a couple questions I want to ask you. One is that, has your father ever said he was sorry for what he did? I mean, at the time when he was
Absolutely.
part of that criminal empire, there were 400 people that were dying a year on the streets, most of them black men. And the other thing is, has he ever indicated how he feels when he sees people who are white that have never gone to jail for crimes that are more heinous than what he did? That's not saying that what he did was not heinous. But there's the old saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. When you see criminal activity in white America, does it make you angry knowing that you have been without your father for the last 30 years? And is that part of the equation that you think we should take into account?
Yeah. First of all, he's super remorseful. He says he's sorry not only to me but to the community in general all the time. We talk about that. But yeah, you've seen the response to the opioid epidemic. You've seen people front load treatment. You see people talking about giving people diversion programs and things of that nature. That was not afforded to communities like mine. So we know that even mandatory minimums themselves were racially motivated. You know, we understand that. We also know that it was other players in that. It wasn't just my guys like my dad who brought drugs into our community. We know that even our own government played a role in that. So with that being said, like I was mentioning, I think it's time for the country to atone for that. People have been held accountable. It's not like people did something and they got away with it. We're talking about decades in prison, right? That's enough. And that's why I implore the Biden administration to take the proper steps to reunite American families like mine, that's all over this country that are awaiting their fathers, their mothers, their sisters, their brothers, their uncles, their aunts, so we can be whole, right? And that's what's really going to, I think, help our communities be stronger and move forward.
So Tony Lewis
And
Jr.,
Bill,
thanks for being with us. You knew I was going to ask you. Yeah, go ahead. One more thing.
I appreciate those questions, but I do want to add. Throughout the '90s, though, when I grew up, right, my formative years, this city got worse, right? When they went to jail in '89, the murder rate skyrocketed after that. Drugs continued to come into our city after that. So the narrative that it was just them, or they were solely responsible for the carnage, I think is unfair. And 32 years in prison, is penance.
No, I agree with you. And in fact, what I was going to say is that I think in order for us to be fair, we have to examine your father for everything that he did, but we also have to ask the questions that nobody has asked yet since the 1980s. And having worked this city, one of the questions that I have had since then is, where did the crack come from? I mean, it's easy to blame young black men at that point in time, in their 18 and 19 years of age, who got caught up in a culture that gave them buckets of money. It's another thing to hold accountable the people that might have flooded this city in Philadelphia and New York and Los Angeles with crack. So, no, I agree. It's time to have the dialogue. All I've maintained since day one is the dialogue has to be honest, it has to be open, but it also has to be very, very transparent about what did the government know and what did it not know. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And in
Tony
closing,
Lewis
if I
Jr.,
may,
good luck tomorrow. Yeah, go ahead.
okay, yeah, I appreciate it. The time. Can I say this last thing? It was a 29-person indictment. My 27 people have been released. Rayful Edmond is no longer serving time on that case. He's still in prison for something that he did after they were incarcerated. So my father is the only person still incarcerated on that case. And so that's also another reason why we feel like redemption should be placed upon him.
Tony Lewis Jr., thanks for being with us, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.